right, let's jump right in. Paralleling multiple generators onto a shared electrical bus, well, it's an incredibly delicate balancing act. Picture this. You've got these massive engines spinning at high speeds, and every single unit literally has to agree, in real time, on exactly how much electrical load it's carrying. If they fall out of sync, the consequences are disastrous. So how do they actually agree? Well, that agreement happens through this tiny analog current signal, measured in milliamps, which then gets translated into a digital language the engine's electronic control module actually understands. Welcome to today's explainer, where we're going to trace that vital signal from end to end. Put yourself in the shoes of a plant engineer for a second. You have 3 paralleled C175 units sharing a load, but suddenly, one unit is consistently carrying way more than its fair share of the burden. The twist here? There are absolutely 0 fault codes on any of the engines. So what's your immediate instinct? You know, a lot of times technicians want to start ripping into the engine's hardware, right? Checking the fuel rack, maybe swapping out sensors. But as you'll see today, when there are no fault codes present, blaming the engine's hardware is usually a very, very expensive mistake. So here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the paralleling balancing act, then look at the conductor and the muscle, how we translate current to PWM, testing the governor interface, and finally, wrap up with some real-world troubleshooting rules. Okay, Section 1, the paralleling balancing act and coordinating multiple units. When you parallel multiple generators, you absolutely need precise coordinated load sharing. See, the engine's internal electronic control module, or ECM, is incredibly smart, but it's entirely inward focused. It needs outside coordination to play nicely with the other generators on the bus. And we need to pay attention to the specific language of that coordination. It's called the speed bias signal. Basically, this is a 0 to 200 milliamp analog current sent by an external governor. In this case, we're talking about standard external governors, like the Woodward 2301E. This tiny little electrical current represents the exact desired adjustment to the engine's speed and load. It's essentially a really simple, robust way of saying, hey, give a little more fuel, or give a little less fuel, so the whole system stays perfectly balanced in frequency and phase. Moving on to Section 2, the conductor and the muscle. 2 brains, 2 jobs. Here is the insight that so many people completely miss. You're dealing with 2 separate brains that have 2 entirely different jobs. Think of it like a symphony orchestra. The Woodward 2301E acts as the conductor. It's standing up at the podium handling all the higher-level load-sharing logic, the speed droop, and the isochronous control across the whole paralleled system. It's giving these subtle little signals to keep everyone in balance. Then on the other side, you have the CAT ECM. This is the muscle, or, the section leader of the orchestra. It actually executes the physical labor, fuel delivery, fuel timing, monitoring internal engine protection. The ECM is just following the instructions given by that external conductor. Which brings us to Section 3, translating current to PWM, or the anatomy of a command. Because the conductor and the muscle are built by different manufacturers for different purposes, they speak completely different electrical languages. That 0 to 200 milliamp analog signal from the Woodward governor, it doesn't mean a thing to the digital CAT ECM on its own. It has to be translated. Let's trace the exact path of this command. Step 1. The Woodward 2301E governor looks at the shared bus and figures out the load needs for its specific generator. Step 2. It outputs that need as an analog 0 to 200 milliamp speed bias signal. Step 3. A converter steps in and physically translates that analog current into a pulse width modulated, or PWM signal. And finally, Step 4, the CAT ECM, which naturally speaks PWM, reads that duty cycle and adjusts the physical fuel rack position. This whole thing is a continuous, real-time closed loop. It's brilliant. So the crucial takeaway here is understanding how to actually read that signal. The 0 to 200 milliamp range represents the entire span of the speed bias adjustment. If you see a mid-range value, it simply tells the ECM to hold steady, no adjustment needed. But as that current swings out toward either extreme of that 200 milliamp span, it's commanding the ECM to dynamically increase or decrease the speed bias to match the shifting total demand. All right, Section 4, testing the governor interface and verifying the translation. Theory is great and all, but how do we actually verify that this invisible conversation is happening correctly out on the floor? Check out the details in this actual field email from an electrician out on a rig. He's outlining a speed issue on engine number 2, and he lays out the exact testing logic based perfectly on the theory we just went over. You can see right there in his notes. The Woodward provides the 0 to 200 milliamp signal to a converter, which changes it to PWM for the ECM. This just proves that these concepts aren't just textbook fluff. They directly dictate how you troubleshoot in the real world. If we extract the technician's exact testing procedure, it gives us this beautiful baseline setup. Before you even think about replacing any parts, you've got to calibrate the milliamp to PWM converter. You have to verify the ECM is programmed for a 3% speed droop, and make sure that both the ECM and the Woodward are targeting the exact same rated speed, which is 1200 RPM in this case. Then you compare the frequency output from the magnetic pickup unit to the controller. Finally, start the engine and run a step load test, 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%, and watch the Woodward software to make sure that milliamp signal increases step by step with the load. If it doesn't, well, your translation is broken. And finally, Section 5, Real-World Troubleshooting Rules. Time to shift your instincts. Bridging two completely separate control systems creates this weird dynamic where your symptoms can point you in the absolute wrong direction. So here are your rapid-fire troubleshooting takeaways to help shift those instincts. Always check the milliamp signal before you assume the CAT ECM has failed. Verify the Woodward 2301E's output before you even think about tearing into the physical fuel rack. Remember our quiz at the beginning of the explainer? If you have 0 fault codes on the engine, but you're seeing a load-sharing imbalance across the bus, you almost certainly have a governor-level signal issue. A miscalibrated or drifting milliamp signal perfectly mimics a mechanical engine issue. I really want to hammer this home because this exact scenario wastes hundreds of diagnostic hours. A subtle load-sharing problem looks exactly like an engine issue. But listen, if the conductor is waving the baton off-tempo, the muscle is just going to follow along. It is an external calibration issue, not an internal hardware failure. If you take a screenshot of anything today, make it this quote right here. The root cause is frequently in the external governor signal, not the engine's control system. Because this interface is such a common integration point in multi-vendor paralleling systems, it is literally the absolute first place you should look when generators stop playing nicely together. So, I'll leave you with this thought to hopefully permanently shift your troubleshooting mindset. Are you replacing your engine's hardware when you really should be checking the conductor's baton? Next time you face a load imbalance, trace the anatomy of the command first. Find out exactly what the 2301E is asking the ECM to do before you go and blame the ECM for doing it. That wraps up our deep dive into the governor interface. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I absolutely can't wait to unpack our next system with you.